Domino Thinking presents Natural Born Speakers with your host, Allison Donaghy. If you were born to talk and want to know how to build your career around it, then Natural Born Speakers is the show for you. Now grab your seat because this is the place to be. Now here is your host, Allison.
Well, hello, everybody. How are you today? I am absolutely miserable that winter is on its way. I know that's a terrible way to start, but boy, I sure do love the sun and being up here on the wet coast of Canada. It's going to rain for the next 6 months, and I probably will not see blue sky, and it's cold and it's miserable, but on the upside, I have an amazing guest today, which is going to do wonders to improving my mood. But before we get started with Lisa, I want to share with you something that happened today. I was meeting with a friend of mine. I'm 47. She's almost 47. And we were talking about menopause. And I'm having a really interesting relationship to it because while I haven't really shown symptoms yet, I am feeling like sometimes I'm not as cold as I used to be. So I'm thinking that this might be the beginning of a hot flash. Not entirely sure. And she was saying she's having very minor symptoms as well. And we got talking about what does it actually mean? And I said, on the one hand, I think it's exciting because it's a new moving into something else. Actually, that was more her talking than me. And more me talking was like, I don't know how I feel about this because it almost seems like we hit this menopause thing. There's this negative connotation around it, in part because of the symptoms, but in part, when women hit menopause, do they just stop mattering? Is that even a word? I don't know. It is today. And I wonder, we see pregnancy as something that's really magical that women do, but we do not feel the same way about menopause. And I was having this really interesting experience with it. And maybe my guest will be willing to talk a little bit about her view on it. I'm not sure where she's at in that whole cycle. Sure. But I'm really faced with the opportunity to think opposite of what I think about or even to understand what I think about. So I would challenge all of you out there that are women or no women who are going through menopause, what does it actually mean? Like both sides of that coin, what does it mean? Anyway, enough about all of our insides shriveling up. Let's get on to our guest here. She is a legal coach and attorney for entrepreneurs, and she's also known as a holistic lawyer. Now, this I really want to talk about because I find it absolutely fascinating because sometimes the law is scary and complicated, and what Lisa does is she makes it less scary for us. She's passionate about helping coaches and entrepreneurs know how to legally protect themselves and their businesses that they're working so freaking hard to create. And she aligns the main legal steps that most entrepreneurs need with the chakras. So this is quite an interesting approach to this. She believes that the law protects us in both practical and spiritual ways. Now, this is not the law that I know, but we're going to get to hear more about it. So welcome, Lisa. How are you?
Thank you, Allison. I am great. And I'm so happy to be here with you and happy to talk about the whole menopause thing as well as making the law less scary, for sure.
Terrific. Well, let's get the menopause thing out of the way.
Okay.
Quick thoughts.
Well, quick thoughts. So I am 46 also, actually, and I have been watching my body as well and trying to figure out if it's just shifting or moving or transforming. But what's so cool is that the pelvic region, the womb, is actually in our second chakra. And our second chakra, you may know this, people listening may know this, is associated with things like abundance and creativity and relationships and boundaries and money and obviously sensuality and sexuality. But there's all kinds of good stuff that lives there. And so I look at menopause actually as just sort of a shift, like things that we haven't been able to express or things that we've needed to literally shed. We're shifting into a different phase of our life where we can express it in a different way. So that's my unique take on the subject, I
like
guess.
it. I certainly do. And I think that was, I was speaking with Rhonda earlier today, and I think that was she's excited about what's on that other side. She talks about it as a bridge, and you don't quite know how long the bridge is or how windy it's going to get when you're on the bridge.
Exactly.
But once you get to the other side, she's very poetic that way. Once you get to the other side, she believes that there is this great new life for us to have. But I'm conflicted a little bit because it's like, well, I'm already kick-ass. I don't need a windy bridge to make me more kick-ass.
I think I just look at it as like a transition or an opening. Like there's more to come. It's different maybe than it's been in the past, but there's more to come. Just like we went from being a girl to a woman, now we're just going from a woman to a more senior woman. And there's magic in that. I believe there is magic and gift in that, despite the fact that maybe hot flashes and discomfort as well.
Yes. It's two sides of the same coin, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Excuse me. Well, enough about menopause. I'm sure I'm going to be spending enough time thinking about it. I don't really know if I need to talk about it anymore. But it is interesting to sort of see those two sides, especially when you think about how women see it, like how you just described it, which is a very healthy way of looking at it, and maybe how society sees it as being something different. Like we are used up by that point. We have less value sexually. Well, why would anybody want us? That whole negative part of it. Right. And up until now, I've been adamant. I am not going through menopause. Like it's just not going to happen to me. But
I get it.
I think there's something in my body arguing about that. So I don't know. Anyway, let's get on to this law and how it can be exciting and not scary. So let me know, how did you get to this? Because this, one, not everybody ends up being a lawyer, and two, most lawyers don't end up with this approach. So how did that come about?
That's so true. So my story started a long time ago. When I was growing up, I ate a lot of peanut M&Ms and drank a lot of coffee early in my life through law school. And I know that sounds crazy, but here's what happened. I went to work at a large law firm, a large corporate law firm, where I was a healthcare attorney. And I worked with hospitals and doctors and licensed professionals, really around the business side. So not around the malpractice side at all, but more around how a hospital operates. And the reason I joke about my love of peanut M&Ms and coffee is because while I was at the law firm, that's basically how I sustained myself. As you can imagine, I worked like a dog. And while I learned a lot and I was around a lot of smart, interesting people, it just sucked the life out of me. Like that law firm, the big law firm, just sucks the life out of you. So I realized when I voluntarily left and didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. So I just knew it wasn't that. And I worked with a life coach. And this is quite a while ago when people didn't even really know what a life coach was, actually. But I worked with a life coach to kind of try to figure it out. And then I realized, I want to become a life coach. So I went to life coach school and worked in other areas at the same time. I worked in nonprofit. I did a lot of volunteer work, and I was still eating these peanut M&Ms and drinking a lot of coffee. And this is the crux of my story, because what happened was I actually went in 2011 to become a health coach. And I went to the Institute of Integrative Nutrition because I knew that this is not normal. And what I was trying to go get a grip on this sugar thing. And I talk about it very openly, but I had a sugar addiction or a sugar sensitivity, not so much around my weight, but definitely around the idea that I had to eat sugar like every 2 hours. So I became a health coach, and I was all ready to go out and help people eat better, more healthy foods, become more balanced in their lives, find peace, kind of blending health and life coaching together. And would you believe that all my health and life coaching friends were like, but you're a lawyer. Wait a minute. We need you. Because traditional lawyers don't understand what we're talking about when we talk about online courses, or when we talk about, conferences, or we talk about creating coaching programs. Like, they don't even know what we're talking about. Entrepreneur, opt-ins, right? So I was like, Dad nabbit, are you kidding me? Like, here I am trying to come away from the law and develop myself as a life coach and work in the nonprofit world and kind of do the exact opposite. Talk about thinking opposite. The exact opposite of a large law firm is working in nonprofit. And here I am back looking at the law, staring at the law in its face. And so what I decided to do was that I realized, wait a minute, just like all of us, we can create a business that we love, and we can create and do our work in a way that feels really good to us. And so I took all the good things from the law firm forward and kind of just left the parts behind that I didn't care for. And I created my own practice where I call myself a holistic lawyer and I call myself a legal coach, because I really do bring the coaching into the legal part. Yeah, because as you can imagine, Allison, I think you know too, that so many people are terrified of lawyers, terrified of the law. And so part of actually putting legal documents and legal containers in place in your business is to not feel scared. And so I actually hold and support people as they're going through the process of putting these legal documents in place so that they feel comfortable using them or giving them to their clients or even just talking about them. And it's definitely a unique way to practice for sure.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I love it. I do. I think it intuitively, it makes so much sense. There's no disconnect from what's needed. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And to go along with that, as I became a coach, I also, really started learning about energy and learning about the law of attraction and learning about karma and just the whole concept of what we put out into the world is what we get back. Mm-hmm. And I realized that the law actually, and I always use the hashtag, the law is spiritual too, because when you create legal containers and documents to hold and support your business, you're obviously giving yourself really solid legal language to fall back on, documents and contracts that, when you engage in your relationship with your clients or with other contractors or whoever, but you also are creating stronger boundaries. Because when you put something in writing in your legal document, you actually create a stronger energetic boundary around it as well. When you get clear, your energy kind of gets clear and it up-levels you in your business. Mm-hmm. And no one would ever expect that in a million years, but I find it over and over and over again, right? So that's why I talk about the law being energetic.
Now, do you think that's different for women and men?
I talk about it in the same way. I use language, obviously, when I'm talking to someone who's like strictly business, I speak more on the business side of the law. But if I work with a lot of female and male healers or therapists or coaches or other website designers, graphic designers, like all kinds of people who provide services. And if they're more energetically inclined, I kind of talk about the spiritual and energetic side of the law more. But I think it depends on who you are. If you're a man or a woman who's sort of open, I think you can speak in this language. So I have some male clients who are very open to talking about both the practical and the spiritual side of the legal documents. So
I think wonder about the boundary part, right? Because we see women of having, for lack of just to make it really easy and cut and dry, is we have weaker boundaries than men do. Men have no problem saying, no, this is the line, you just crossed it. Whereas women are like, well, there was sort of a kind of a line there, and I know it wasn't very easy to see, but it was there kind of, and maybe it was my mistake. Yeah. So I really love how when you state that legal part of it and you put it out there, I could see how that would be really empowering.
Yeah. And what's so funny, we were just talking, like, it's not by chance we were just talking about the whole menopause thing and the second chakra.
There are no chances.
No, they're not. I was like, I can't believe I literally have done interviews around the second chakra and legal contracts. So you hit the nail on the head, because legal contracts actually help to create those boundaries when you're working with someone. I agree to do this. You agree to do this. And I think even with men, you're so right. Men, generally speaking, have stronger boundaries. But at the same time, I love men, don't get me wrong, but they sometimes don't communicate as much. Like, they're much more cut and dry and short sentences. And sometimes you need to actually have more language to expound upon what you're actually agreeing to do, so there's less ambiguity. So I always say in the law, more is more. Less is not more when it comes to legal language. More is more. Because if you don't say something, you can't argue that you actually wanted to enforce it. It's much harder to prove when you don't have it in writing. So men sometimes are just like, they're like, can I have a contract that's a page long? And I'm like, actually, no, because we need to have more language in there to support what you're saying. So that's where I think it falls on the male side versus female. In terms of communication.
I'm always so fascinated by how different we are. Like, and not better, not worse. Like, it's two sides of that same coin. I keep going back to that, but it's fascinating.
It is fascinating, and it really is, because some men are. I actually think, you know what, Allison? I would say more. It comes down to if you're a giver or a receiver. And we could talk about that with men and women all night long. But in general, what I mean, second chakra, right? What I mean is I think anyone who comes to life sort of with more of a giving approach has a harder time with boundaries. Stereotypically, that is women, but it's also people in healing professions. Like, I think there's some male therapists where sometimes that's challenging, or male coaches because they just want to give and help, right? So it's creating that clarity and creating those lines around your policies. As a coach, for example, like, how do your services work, and how does payment work? And what if someone misses a payment? And what if someone misses a call? Do they get to make it up? Do they forfeit it? What happens? And the clearer that you are at the outset, male or female, going into your relationship, the better results your client will have, and the less stress you'll have or headaches you'll have, because everything's clear. And that supports your second chakra and those boundaries we talked about.
Wow.
Crazy, huh? No one would think of the law this way, really.
No,
because
law just feels, for me, my experience with it, not that I've been in courtrooms or anything like that, but you see it on TV, and I have a friend who is a family lawyer, and it is just so combative.
I know. And it can be, and it's necessary for lawyers to be combative if you are in court, or because lawyers take an oath to vigorously, and zealously, actually is the word, defend their client. And so what does that mean, to zealously defend your client? That can be ferocious. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but you can see how people are ethically actually doing what they think is in the best interest of their client. And I used to work in litigation a little bit, but for the most part, I don't do any litigation now at all. I'm much more focused on the positive business building side of the law, and not really representing people against people. But I always feel like I have to advocate for the lawyers of the world, that those who are vigorous are actually doing their job to defend and protect and support their client to the best of their ability. And that's actually what they're trained to do. It just doesn't feel so good if you're involved in the court situation, or if you're watching it on TV. It's very masculine, it's very harsh. But it does. In fact, I'm writing a book right now, Allison, about all of this, entrepreneurship and chakras and the law. And I actually write in the book a little bit about how I think lawyers are all sort of wounded healers who are trying to help and save the world, because they go to law school to fight for justice and stand up for people who can't speak for themselves. And then they sort of come out of law school ready to work in a big law firm or for the government, which is not exactly that. So
although how many professions are like that? Like, a friend of mine got into nursing, and she thought it was going to be great. And I remember having conversations with her, and I said, have you not read the paper? It's so hard being a nurse, and the striking and the hours and all of that. And she's like, no, it'll be fine. A year later, out of the industry, she said to me, she goes, oh my God, I hate it. And I'm like, you don't get to hate it. Like, you just have to remember why you're doing it, or go back to school and do something entirely different. But RCMP is the same. I had an assistant. Her husband was RCMP up the police up here.
Oh, okay.
And in 5 years, I watched him change from the guy who just wanted to have a job for his family to something different, because he's on that side of the blue line. And teachers, same thing. If you ask a teacher why they get into it, it's a different answer than when they've been doing it for 5 years.
Exactly. Yeah. And, it's hard when you do anything that's sort of entering a big institution or a traditional line of practice. But that's why for people who do leave or do it on their own, like usually probably like your nursing friend, they just abandon the whole profession. And that's really sad. Your friend has all this amazing nursing skills and talent and expertise and education. So that's where I found if I could do it in a way that felt good to me, and that was obviously legal and ethical and appropriate, but that allows me to have this expression of the spiritual side or the chakras, or just lining legal steps with chakras to make it easier for people to understand them and what order they go in. That's allowed, and that's a gift. It's just that most people don't do it that way. Most lawyers aren't taught to do it that way, and don't, for whatever reason, weren't struck by lightning like I was, some lightning rod that was like, do it this way. I don't know where that came from, but
well, I think it totally makes you ahead of the curve in the fact that you gave yourself permission to be authentic in everything that you were doing. And I think if more of us did we would have, you're welcome. It's impressive. And more of us did it, then we would perhaps have an easier time with some of these positions.
Yes, and you do that too, Allison, obviously, particularly on this show and the work that you do. And what I have to tell you in all authenticity and truth is that that's been the hardest part, right? Is actually feeling courageous enough to do it differently and to be visible and to be vocal and to really share that this is what I believe. And that's part of why I'm writing this book, because I want to memorialize it, kind of. I want to get it officially in writing that this is my philosophy. This is what I believe. And if someone chooses to look at it differently, that's totally fine. But this is what I really believe in my heart are the gifts of the law, even though people don't always see it that way.
Right. Yeah. Because I remember taking law in high school, and I always thought I would actually go into law. And because I just saw it as this beautiful thing. And then I kind of realized that I don't have great retention. And so for me to then start quoting or remembering, or that's not how I learn, that's not how I express. And so I thought, this probably isn't the right job for me. But I'm fascinated with the whole process and how it works. And well, so super cool to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's really just the legal documents and legal protections are really just tools to support people in their life and in their business. They're just tools to help you feel and know that you're safe and secure. And then also they really help you feel confident and empowered in your business, because when you know, and that's why you'll love this. That's why my legal course that I created, I gave it this sort of name that it's called Get Legally Covered So You Can Go Bare, right? Because when you're covered legally, you really do feel safe and secure to actually show up and bare your heart and soul to the world. And I always say, you don't want to be legally naked, but you do want to feel safe to go bare. Totally different feelings, totally different experiences.
Right.
So when people put those foundational steps in place for their family, like having a will, or some cases people have trusts, or just getting their personal finances in order. And, if you have a business, making sure that you're using contracts and you're creating your limited companies and you're, making sure that you have your website documents on your website. It just gives you that sense of security, knowing that you're not hanging out there legally naked and exposed.
Right.
And your buns are covered. So I love talking about it that way. I don't think I could talk about it that way in the traditional law firm, but I love talking about covering your buns and
it certainly makes it more relatable.
Exactly. But why does it have to be not relatable, right? Why we want it to be relatable? We want people to feel safe using it and empowered using it, not scared. So that's why I do
fascinating.
This work.
So before we actually go on any further and actually talk about how we need the law in our life, you're American, I'm Canadian. How does that impact?
Sure. Well, first of all, I love, love, love Canada. Just to let you know, my husband and I honeymooned there in Whistler and Vancouver, and we actually just went back last month to Whistler and Vancouver and Kelowna, and we love it. So I have a lot of Canadian clients and other clients from across the world. And here's how I work. Obviously, I'm not a Canadian lawyer. I'm not licensed in Canada. So when I create legal templates, they're designed for people with online businesses, people who are speaking on stage, people who are coaches, people who are supporting sort of healing professions, holistic practitioners. It kind of runs the gamut. But for people who have a large online presence, and what I do is create documents with the language that's needed for our type of work. And then I encourage everyone to take that document to a Canadian lawyer, for example, and have that Canadian lawyer look at the document to make sure it complies with Canadian law. Right. Because what I found, Allison, is people would come to me with the opposite. Like they'd come to me with their Canadian agreement, or they'd come to me with their agreement from somewhere else. Even certain states, traditional lawyers created, and it's much harder to actually insert language for the entrepreneurial world. It's much easier to start off with the contract that you need and then have them go through and make sure that the language complies with that country. Right. So, since I can't do it for them, that's the easiest way to do it. So that's why I've created do-it-yourself legal templates with audio guides to help people, and the legal course that we just talked about, so that people can get their legal documents in order inexpensively and in a way that's fun and interesting and aligned with the chakras. But then they can just take it back to their family lawyer or whoever and just have them take a glance through it and make sure that anything doesn't need to be tweaked a little.
Right. So how much would a person expect to spend on just covering their basics?
That's a great question. So it depends on what you do. This probably won't surprise you, but the basic, and it also depends on where you are in your practice. So I usually tell people, if you're coming from a coaching world or a one-on-one service provider, usually you start with two things. And often people have a website. It may be a small website. They're just starting to get an online presence, but they know that the website is an important part of starting their business, and they want to do one-on-one coaching or service providing in some way. So there are two documents I tell people they need right at the beginning. This won't surprise you. They align with the root chakra and the sacral chakra. So the first document is a website disclaimer. And that document is actually, it's not like 2 sentences at the bottom of your website. That's just not enough to cover your buns. It's actually a longer document, a couple pages long, that really tells people what it is that you do and what it is that you don't do, so that you have some coverage on your site, creating clarity that, hey, listen, what you're reading on my website is really just informational and educational. It's not medical advice or legal advice or financial advice or psychological advice or religious advice or whatever, and you really just need to read this site and use your own judgment before you apply it to your life. That's your first base document, because it gives you some protection and it actually helps you feel more secure and not like your website's hanging out there in the world with nothing on it.
Right. So is there a big difference between Canadian ones and American ones?
Not really. So a lot of people use like my DIY do-it-yourself website disclaimer and then show it to their Canadian attorney, because the website world is very similar. Canada and Australia and some of the other European countries have stronger privacy policy laws than we do in the U.S., and we should have the same as yours, but we don't. And for example, in Canada, if you're a business owner with an opt-in gift on your website, and people, or even if they're subscribing to a newsletter, they put their name and email address in, you have to use what's called a double opt-in by law. Right. So, they have to then confirm that they want to receive the information you're sending to them. That's not required by law in the U.S., except in some states here, but not across the board. Okay. So because a lot of online entrepreneurs actually have clients from all over the world, I encourage everyone to have a privacy policy, which is step 4, to get that in place. But starting with the website disclaimer at least gets people going. And then after that, they just use a client agreement, which is the second step, aligned with the sacral chakra, to help create those boundaries we talked about in those policies with their one-on-one contract to use with their clients. So those are the first 2 steps. The price, you asked about the price, it can really depend. If you have a lawyer privately create them for you, they can easily be $1,500 a document. But if you use templates, or certainly the templates that I create is more around $397, $400 American dollars. But I have payment plans where you can do it in 2 payments, because my personal philosophy, even my legal course, is done in 10 payments. Like, what lawyer allows you to make 10 payments to get your legal documents? But this is why I'm
usually it's a retainer up front and they'll give you what's left, right?
Right. No, I don't. And that's great if lawyers want to do that. That's great. I'm not here to tell them that's not the way to do it. But for me, the coach in me knows what it's like to own a small business. Like, I get it. And I want people to get their documents and not let the payment get in the way of that, because they're building their business. Right. So just believe in the payment plan model or pay in full. But yeah, so I try to make them reasonable for legal documents. They can really vary, but the idea is you want to have documents that actually cover the work that you do, and you just want to make sure that you have them reviewed by someone in your country or your state.
All right. Well, that makes sense. Now, you talk about your website. This might be a good time to share what that is.
Oh, my website. Okay. It's just my name, lisafraley.com. So LISA, and my last name is FRALEY.com. lisafraley.com. And there's free legal tips there that people can sign up for. Obviously, my opt-in gift and my joining my tribe. And then my blog posts have a lot of legal tips in them, what you need in certain situations. So,
Terrific.
Yeah, thank you.
No, that's great. Now, we're talking a lot about speakers here. So now we've covered off the website, how you have to deal with that. Now, with speaking, what do people need? Like legally, what are you responsible for?
Great. I'm so glad we're talking about that, because there are things that you need before, during, and after you speak on stage. And I'm a speaker. I speak often, and I'm always elated when the event host actually does this first step. So before you speak, and you teach, Allison, people have to think about so many details, right? Like, do I have to do a PowerPoint, and who's responsible for the slides? And do I have to show up early? And do I have to greet people? And what about costs? Like, is this a paid talk? Is this a free talk? Are any of my expenses covered? Are they not covered? What time do I need to be? Like, all these crazy details. So you want to use a speaker agreement with your event host that really creates that clarity around what's expected of you, what's expected of the event host, how payment works if you're being paid. But even if you're not being paid, you still need to know, like, can I make an offer from the stage? Am I just up here giving information? What am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? And how does it fit in with the overall feel and theme of the conference?
Right.
So huge document that really lets people feel more secure before they take the stage.
Makes
I'm
sense.
a huge fan of speaker agreements.
And that really sets out reasonable expectation.
Exactly.
Let's just make this clear. And I find, because I have another business, I paint houses, I always find that I'm trying to do that reasonable expectation. This is what you can reasonably expect. This is how it's going to look. We can't make it look like this. We can only make it look like that.
Exactly.
And so it makes life so much easier when I have these conversations with my clients ahead of time. And it stands to reason that the speaking would go so much smoother if that was the case as well.
Absolutely. And, especially when people, like, you think about your business with painting houses, like, people have a vision of what they want it to look like in their mind. And if your vision doesn't match their vision, that's when problems happen.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And so anytime that you can use these documents, I actually say contracts are gifts. They're gifts to your clients, and people are like, what? But they actually are gifts to your clients, because everyone can settle in and freaking relax when they know what the expectations are and they're in writing. You both are on the same page. Payment is very clear. When is payment made? How does that work? What's the event host providing? What are you providing? Because that's the part that stresses people out. It's like, am I supposed to bring a freaking jump drive to put the slides up on, or do I have to send them early to the event host? Do I have to bring handouts? Do they provide, like, all that stuff is very stressful for people, especially if they're already traveling somewhere to speak. So the more that you get clear about having your expectations match, just like with your house painting business, it just creates happy people, which is the whole
so much easier.
Point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly.
Because then you can focus on production. Like, you don't have to focus on those details because they're taken care of. You can just focus on what you're actually supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Practicing,
That's
writing.
where you want your energy to go. Exactly.
So then go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I do have a do-it-yourself speaker agreement, obviously, through my website too, if that's helpful for anyone. But let's move on to what we do during the speech.
Yes.
Okay, so now that you have your speaker agreement with your speaking host, during your speech, there's a couple things to think about. And the first one is you've put all this work into this content. So now people worry about, I like to call them copycats and swipers. right? People, especially if you have handouts that go along with your talk, or people want copies of the slides, like how do you actually protect your content? How do you actually protect what you're saying? And so clearly the agreement will have some of that in there, but you want to do a couple easy things, especially on slides or handouts. One is you want to put your copyright, the copyright symbol with your business name after it. And copyright, obviously there's Canadian copyright laws, there's American copyright laws. They go by country, but they're similar in many ways. And when you put that little C with the circle on it, on your document, you're kind of putting like a stamp on your materials that they're yours. You're claiming them as yours. And that's the first step for copyright law to recognize that they're yours.
Do you have to actually register your your information?
In the U.S., you can use the little C with the circle around it just to claim it. You don't have to register it. But what happens is when you register it, and this is true in Canada, is that you then have laws that actually back you to go after someone who takes it, specifically around copyright laws. And I don't want to make this too confusing, but part of what's so important about your speaker agreement, or what's so important about your website documents, for example, is that it has language in there that talks about who owns that content. Do you own it, or the event host? Does the event host own the content, or do you share ownership of content? Who gets to use it afterwards? How does that work? And then the event host needs to have a terms or contract with the event attendees that say the same thing. Like, hey, attendees, you can't take any of my work or the speaker's work while you're at the event.
Okay,
right?
Well, that makes sense.
So copyright law is federal law, and then those terms and contracts is actually contract law. So they're two different areas entirely. Copyright laws give you protections at the federal copyright sort of level, and then the contract law is more your private contract between you and the attendee, or you and the event host. So you want to have as much protection as you can. I tell people not to, you can copyright your slides, you can copyright your handouts, but here's the deal with copyright. When you do file a copyright with the National Copyright Office, you can't change those documents afterwards. So the copyright is like stamping what exists right then. Well, and all of us online entrepreneurs change our stuff all the time.
So much. Yeah.
So it's not really worth it unless you do a hefty ebook, or obviously if you're writing a book, or things that are going to stay that way for a long time, then it's worth doing copyright.
Right. Okay.
But so claiming it is a good step, because you're still putting people on notice that you are creating these, you are the owner of these documents.
Right. So at the very least, you want to just throw that on there somewhere.
Exactly.
And if anything happens, then you deal with sort of the fallout after the fact.
Exactly. And this is where I also believe it sort of energetically raises your frequency, like it raises your vibe, because that's a level of professionalism. By even just having that on there shows people that that's your work, you've claimed your work. It's kind of like a subtle message of saying, this is mine. Right? And I think that can make a difference. The other thing is, on your slides, you also want to make sure that you do use a mini disclaimer. So if you're someone who's giving advice, or you're someone who's a licensed professional, or you are, you want people to know this is just information for them. You're not standing up there giving advice. So like if you're your nurse friend, she's not giving nursing advice. If you're a doctor, you're not giving medical advice. If you're a therapist, you're not giving therapy advice. Like, people just need to know this is information that can help them.
Right.
It's really important.
Okay. So then we're dealing with the after.
Yeah, exactly. Then we're dealing with the after. So here's what happens afterwards. I kind of alluded to it before, and the speaker agreement should contain this information, but what happens after the event? So now your event is done, and maybe there was a videographer, maybe there was a photographer, maybe your event host is sort of capturing everything. Do they get to use that in their programs going forward? Like, can they wrap all that up in a nice package and sell it under their name? Do you get paid for that, or do you not get paid for that? Are you allowing them to do that? Can you take that content for that speech and go use it in another speech somewhere else? Is that allowed? Or did you have to create this content specifically and only for this event? There's rules, especially if payments involved. Sometimes if it's a paid talk, they'll say, yeah, this is just for us. Or
so do you think that
we can use it again?
Does this not get included in the before?
It does. But what happens is people don't really think about it until the after.
Okay.
people don't really think about it. And if for some reason you didn't have a speaker agreement on the front end, then it's worth having an agreement on the back end as to how you can use the media. Like how will the media be used? How will your content be used? I obviously recommend it on the front end, but the very least on the back end, so that you have something in writing that allows you to use your content again, or them to use the content again, or both.
Okay. That makes sense. It's great.
People don't always think about those parts, so that's why I like to emphasize them.
Mm-hmm. And I have your website up right now, and I just want our listeners to know that it's super easy to work your way through. Obviously, all the tabs are at the top, but if you go to services, it really outlines all of the things that Lisa can do with you and for you. And I really recommend that you go there and just get your butt covered on this stuff. Now, why do people not bother with this? Is it the money? Is it the idea that nothing's ever going to happen? Why do people just avoid the legalities?
Yep. There are so many reasons. You hit on a couple. One is the cost. They think it's just going to be outrageously expensive. And that's why, like on that services tab, I have those do-it-yourself legal templates, because it doesn't have to be that expensive. It really does. You want it done properly, but the cost scares people. They just think it's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And it can be sometimes if you work with an attorney who is just a traditional attorney that charges by the hour, charges a retainer, whatever. Mm-hmm. Some lawyers are just very expensive. Secondly, I think a lot of people do think, oh, nothing's going to happen. If someone takes my stuff, that's okay. But what they don't realize is after they've spent 250,000 hours preparing their online course, then someone takes it and then they're bummed. Like then they're really pissed and they're bummed.
Right.
And it's usually after something bad happens that then they come to say, help, what do I do to prevent this in the future? Same with refund policies. When people come and ask for refunds, clients ask for refunds, people are like, I don't want to give a $10,000 refund or $2,000 refund or even a $300 refund. They just, so the fear of actually dealing with lawyers, the cost, the idea that nothing's going to happen. And then also the one I get all the time too, Allison, is that people feel like, oh, I'm not far enough along in my business. I'm just starting. I'm new. I'm small. I only have a few clients. Like, okay, that's great. But here's the deal. It's like better to be safe than sorry, because you can have 3 clients, but if that third client is the one who's kind of wishy-washy and you don't have strong boundaries, or they don't have strong boundaries, and they're in, halfway through your course, and they're like halfway through your one-on-one coaching program, and they want the money back, you don't have anything in writing that says you can't have it back. So it doesn't matter how many clients you have. It really it's part of building the foundation of your business. And that's why I'm a huge fan. That's why I came up with the chakras, because I just want people to do what they need now, and the rest can wait until they get to it. Right. Like go one step at a time to put the legal documents in place, just like you build your business one step at a time. So it doesn't have to be overwhelming or scary or confusing or expensive or terrifying. Basically.
Despite what we might think.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. Not many lawyers take this sort of approachable tack to the law, because it's not how we're trained.
Okay, I need to back up for a second. Not many, or like none, because seriously, you're the first one. Like, you make it sound like people like you are easy to find. Yeah. And I would beg to differ. I think it's a very cut and dry profession when it's presented to a lot of people, and it certainly doesn't have this coaching aspect that goes along with it. And so I'd like to clarify that you are
you're sweet.
You are a unique little one.
Thank you. Yes, I definitely believe in helping people through the fear and helping people, make the law comfortable so that you can protect and support this business that you're working so hard to build. Like, that's my passion. That's my reason why I do this work, is because, it may sound corny, but like, I really do want to support particularly women, but I also love working with men, but particularly women in having their own businesses that they build their own way, that feel good to them, that work in their life, and that allow them to express themselves in the way that they want to in the world. Like, I want to help empower women and have them feel confident and safe and secure and not worried that someone's going to come after them or worried someone's going to take their business away from them. I don't want them to, they don't need to feel that way. I really want them to feel held and cared for and protected. That's why I do this work. Can you hear my passion there? I don't know.
It is kind of crawling through the radio waves at me. And that's so important. Like I don't know about our listeners, but I absolutely love doing business with people who love what they do. I really do. I just find it's so much easier to spend my money with people who are digging their days.
Yeah.
Exactly. I want to support people like that. And I would be so much happier giving somebody like you money than some dry lawyer who's just pushing me through like cattle.
Yeah. And well, thank you. I mean, thank you for that. That's kind. You've been very kind to say those nice things. But it's really about helping people get what they need to have the business they want. That's really the bottom line, and doing it in a way that feels good. So I do feel like I'm on the cutting edge of the law, and certainly trying to overcome some stereotypes and overcome traditional ways of doing things. And law, the one thing I will say is that the reason why law doesn't look forward too much is because the law is all based on the backwards. Like law is all based on precedent, which means when something comes to court, like, any court, they look at what other judges had and what decisions have been made before them. So they're always looking backwards. Right. And it took me a long time to realize that, like, that's why it's like a slow moving ship to change, because it's always kind of looking backwards by the nature of the business. They are making cutting edge decisions, but with a lot of trepidation and very cautiously, and, small steps to reflect society's views on things. But in general, entrepreneurs and business owners look forwards, especially online entrepreneurs. We're all looking forward to how can we go where we want to grow, and, having the tools to help support us no matter what they are, to do that is what we need.
Right. Yeah. It's, okay. I struggle a little bit when I read some of these documents, because I get it from like that legal perspective where they have to be so careful. Do they use this word or that word? Because this word could be interpreted like this, and that word could be interpreted like that, and we don't want to get the wrong. So I understand why it has to be like that. But seriously, is there no way of making it more readable?
Well, you are going to be elated, my friend, because that's exactly what I do, is make it readable. Like 90% of the document is in plain English. Everything that I create is designed to be readable for both the business owner and the client, or the, one contractor to another contractor. There are a couple sections in legal documents that are more legally heavy, and they do need to be when you're talking about things like limiting liability and disclaimers and releasing people from claims, and sometimes intellectual property. There are some sections. I mean, that's why you have a legal document, right? You need that language to protect you. But in general, for example, if we're talking about one-on-one coaching or one-on-one service, like your painting service, you are describing what is included in their service. That you can do all that in plain English. Payment, you can do all that in plain English. What happens if, the day doesn't work out for you to show up at their house to paint, or what happens if the coaching client can't come to the call? Like, how does that work? What happens? That can all be in there. It does. There are big parts of the agreement that are just merely stating what it is that you're doing. And then the legal parts are there to kind of have the language to protect and support your work in a way that the legal world understands. But it can be done. In fact, I even put color in my documents, if you can believe this. I'm sure their lawyer's like rolling. My great uncle is rolling over in his grave because my great uncle was a lawyer. But yeah, colors of people's branding colors. Because why does the legal document have to be black and white? Why? How does that make it any less enforceable when the headings are in color? I don't understand. So it's not. So I like to infuse it with that person's energy and that person's branding, and people do it on their own with the templates. They infuse their own energy into it. And the reason why that's important, I think, Allison, is because when you feel like the document is yours, and when you feel that you've put your love into the document, then it makes it so much easier to use with your clients, or so much easier to put on your website. Like, it's just another part of your business that's aligned with who you are, aligned with your energy. And that's why actually one of my big themes is actually, I say all the time that I do things with legal love, because legal and love seem like such a juxtaposition, but really they can go together. They can go together, and they should go together.
Yeah, and I can see how the relationships become so much simpler when both parties can understand what they're agreeing to. And I think anytime I've been involved with something that has gone a little bit sideways, I struggle because the communication at the beginning wasn't clear. But when it's very clear, this is what you're getting, the initial here that you understand that, it makes it so much nicer down the road. If there's a problem, go, well, you did take the time to read that initial there, and or whatever the case may be. And somebody said to me one time, business is personal until there's a problem, and then it becomes business.
Oh, interesting.
I love it because I want to do business personally with people. Like, I want to have those relationships. And I think there is that confusion that you don't have to do things legally if you're playing nice. But doing things legally is actually part of playing nice, because you're telling people the rules before they sign up to play the game.
Exactly. Which is why I call it a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And you both have copies of the rules. You both have copies of a signed agreement, for example, and you both are clear about them. And then it's almost like you can set it down and just focus on your work together. It's like we talked about that speaker agreement. Once it's in place, you just focus on creating your speech. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. It's really a gift to both of you to have all those things ironed out in advance, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. And if there is a problem, you just go back to the document and you do what the document says, and voila, the problem is solved. Not every time, obviously, but in general, there's so many times with clients where the coach will call me and say, my client didn't pay, or they want a refund, and I'll say, let's look at your client agreement, and here's what you want. Here's the language you can use to reply to them, and just say, hey, here's my refund policy, copy paste that you agreed to, and a lot of times it goes away. They just forgot that they agreed to a refund policy. You know? So it's just to create more ease. How do you
deal with those people? Like, I took my staff to Trigo, which is you harness up, you go up in the trees, and you zip line all over the place, right?
Cool.
Super, super fun.
Cool.
It's, and it really helps people overcome their fears in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But all of my staff just signed on the dotted line, and I said to them, I'm like, did you guys even read what you're signing? And they're all like, Ma. And I'm like, no, it's not meh. Like, you need to know what's going to happen if you fall out of that tree and you land on your head.
Exactly.
So how do you combat that? Because there is that tendency, and I blame Apple or iTunes or Facebook or whatever, because it's like, do you agree? Hit the agree button. Like, who reads those 12,000 pages of what you're agreeing to? So how do you combat that?
So a couple ways. First, when on the side of the person signing, like they're signing because they trust nothing is going to happen to them, right? It goes back to, like, they just think, oh yeah, this is fine. I'm fine. It is, people don't read them sometimes or often, and they really should. But if they don't, it's their choice. It's an empowered choice that they make. They are assuming the risk, and they assume the risk by not even reading it. But it's being provided to them, right? And every person chooses whether or not they agree to it. It's your choice. So we can't force them, but we want to encourage them. And especially with one-on-one contracts, like coaching contracts, I always tell people, like, present this with such warmth that they feel comfortable asking you questions. Like, say, please read this and take a look and let me know if you have any questions about any sections. I'm happy to talk it through with you. I want to make sure you're perfectly comfortable before we start our work together. Like, love them up around their contracts. So then maybe that actually inspires them to actually read it,
Right.
Because you're almost telling them, please read it and ask me any questions, because I want it to make sure you feel good and clear before we go into our relationship together. So part of it's the invitation. From the side of the coach or the business, here's the deal. A lot of the agreements and terms and things like that are designed to protect both of you. But bottom line is, you're the business owner and you have a lot at risk if you don't provide rules and terms for people. So the business part does come out, and you need to cover your buns, and you do need to be clear, and you do need to say all of these things, because if something does go wrong, where does everyone go and where do lawyers go? Boom, what's in writing? So you do need terms of use that are 12, 13, 14, 15 pages long, which sounds ridiculous. And it looks a lot less when it's actually on a computer. But you really do, because you need sections around disclaimers and section around online commerce and sections around their behavior and sections around limiting liability and releasing claims and intellectual property and what can they do with the content in your course and what can they not do. And I mean, there's a lot that actually goes into it. So it may sound like, and it's funny because a lot of my clients will say, why do this need to be so long? And when we go through it, they're like, oh, now I know why it's so long.
Right.
So,
well, and I know personally,
really,
like when I've had to sign contracts, when they're broken down for me and they're like, okay, initial here that you've read, like for all those really important parts, like it's non-refundable initial here, or it's, and then it can go on and read all sorts of things. But I'm like, okay, it doesn't matter why it's non-refundable. It's non-refundable. I've just signed that. And I find from my perspective, when I'm signing contracts, that when I can, all the important parts are highlighted, I can just initial those. Now, granted, I'm trusting that they're pulling out all of the highlights.
Yeah, right. That's okay.
But I do feel that the person who created a contract like that for me to understand is more enjoyable to do business with as well.
Yeah.
Because it's not all really fine print.
A really good point. Really good point. Yes. Especially around payment, around charging credit cards, around refunds, around, and particularly like with your painting service, like satisfaction of the service, like if they're not happy with whatever's going on, like when do they need to tell you this? Like if they say, oh no, that's the wrong color blue, like when do they need to tell you this? They shouldn't be telling you when you're on the end of the fourth wall, like, hello. So clarity around all of that too is, it's just, like I said, it's just a gift. It creates boundaries. It's clear policies. It just makes your life so much better.
Yes. Yeah. It makes total sense. And what a treat for people to stumble across you. And really, I mean it. It's, you've made more sense about legalities in this hour than I've learned from a lot of lawyers over years. And it's said in a way that's easy to understand. It's open, it's honest. And I really want to thank you for taking that leap of faith that you had a better way of doing things.
Aww.
And it's huge. So thank you so much for providing that for the people that are out there.
Thank you. Thank you for honoring that and acknowledging that. All of us and all of your listeners, I'm sure, are doing things that are unique and doing things in their own way and taking leaps of faith every single day to have the business they want or the life that they want. And that's what a gift, what a freaking gift that we all are enlightened to do it. I mean, that's courageous and enlightened to do it. That's the gift. So thank you too, Allison, for everything you do and providing this platform to allow people to share their story and help people in lots of ways. So thank you.
Oh, well, you're most welcome. My show is actually ending at the end of this year, and I will be doing a new show in the new year about thinking opposite to get people really thinking about what it is that they think about, where are thoughts coming from, that sort of thing. And I feel that that's definitely more in line with what I really want to get people doing. I'm going to be speaking in Santa Barbara, and I'm speaking in India and the Netherlands and London.
Goodness.
And so I'm quite excited about getting this message out there. My book just launched. And so it's so interesting to hear what you have to say and how, like, my brain's going a mile a minute about how do I introduce all of that to make it all make sense so that I don't have to wonder and think about that.
Wow. Well, I love that you're such a change maker and that you help people like a light worker and a change maker and help people think about things differently. That's a gift.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So we got a couple minutes left here. Wow, that hour went by so quickly. And I always know it's going to be a great guest when I lose track of time. And Nesha, our producer, has been giving us these notices. And I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, I missed that time. So thanks, Nesha, for trying to keep us on track.
Exactly.
And so we got a couple minutes left. So what sort of parting remarks do you want to leave for the audience?
Sure. So what I'd love to invite everyone to do, if you're a business owner, is I'd love to invite you to just stop for a couple of minutes and just take a look at your own documents. Take a look to see if you have a website disclaimer in place for your website to create that root chakra level of protection. Take a look to see if you are using a contract, and do you feel good about your contract? Did you grab it off the internet randomly? Did you get it from someone randomly? Like, does it really suit your business, both practically and energetically? So do a little inventory to see where you are legally, and then just set a goal to do one legal step. Take one legal step before the end of the year, and just start slowly, but move in the direction of protecting the work that you're working so hard to create. That would be my invitation, I guess, to everyone on the call.
Well, I think that's a great invitation. I think people should take you up on it. And again, they can go to your website, which is, tell us again.
LisaFraley.com, LisaFraley.com.
Terrific. I always find it sounds so much better when it comes from my guest than it comes from me. So thank you again for being on the show. It's been an absolute treat, and I hope we stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Allison, for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here. You're amazing.
Oh, that's
Thank
excellent.
you.
You're very welcome. So until next Thursday, speak up because you have something to say, and I want to hear it.
Thanks for hanging out with Natural Born Speakers. But don't stop now. Contact Allison with questions to be a guest or hire her as a speaker. Go to dominothinking.com. See you same place and time next week.